Hey there. Look, I know you are incredibly busy.
You've got a lot on your plate right now, yeah.
Right. You're constantly juggling high-stakes tasks, making critical decisions, and, frankly, you just don't have the luxury of spending hours digging through dense psychological literature.
Nobody does. I mean, not unless it's your actual job.
Exactly. You want the insights, you want to optimize your performance, but without the massive stress of information overload. So, welcome. Think of this not as just another podcast you're listening to, but as a highly tailored deep dive, just for you.
And today's deep dive it's a critical one. We are unpacking the actual mechanics of mental fortitude. We're looking at a phenomenal foundational text, which is Mental Training by Addison Bell.
Which is a fantastic read, by the way.
It really is, and we're pairing Bell's work with several supplementary architectural models of human optimization, because the goal here isn't just to, talk about grit as some abstract philosophical virtue.
No, we need the blueprint. We are going to decode exactly how to build that grit. We want to hack the biological anchors of the brain, reprogram those stubborn habit loops, and completely reframe how you process failure.
Right. What's fascinating here is Bell's refusal to treat the mind as this mystical, untouchable entity. It's an interconnected biological and psychological system, and systems can be trained.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can build this unbeatable mind, we have to understand the materials we're actually working with. We need to define some of these buzzwords.
Yeah, the terminology gets messy.
It really does. Words like resilience and mental toughness have been completely hijacked by, internet hustle culture. They get thrown around interchangeably. But our sources draw a really rigid line between them.
Well, I mean, it starts with resilience, which, interestingly enough, is a term derived from engineering and metallurgy.
Wait, like material science?
Exactly. In engineering, resilience describes the capacity of a material to absorb energy when it's deformed elastically and then return to its original shape. Think of the wings of a commercial airplane.
Right, they bounce around a lot in turbulence.
They flex. They bend significantly under atmospheric pressure. If they were made of a completely rigid material...
They just snap right off.
Exactly. Psychologically, resilience operates on that exact same principle. It's your safety net. It's your flexibility, your ability to heal, absorb stress, and bounce back to your baseline.
So resilience is essentially the shock absorber. It's how you survive the turbulence. But then mental toughness is something else entirely.
Right. Mental toughness is the end state. If resilience is the foundation, toughness is the applied, proactive execution of your will.
So if resilience helps you survive,
Yeah.
toughness allows you to actually thrive and advance.
Yes. You rely on resilience to heal from a setback, but you utilize mental toughness to aggressively push forward despite knowing those setbacks are coming. You can't manufacture toughness without a deep baseline of resilience.
Which totally challenges this traditional macho view of toughness, doesn't it? I mean,
Cool.
so what does this all mean? Is toughness just being this stubborn, emotionless rock that resists all change?
No, that's the exact opposite of what the data shows. What's fascinating here is that human resilience relies entirely on flexibility, not rigidity. A bullheaded refusal to adapt isn't toughness. It's a massive vulnerability.
Because a rigid material just breaks under pressure.
Exactly. And unlike a steel beam that stays broken until you weld it, the human psychological system has this intrinsic capability to organically heal itself. We adapt.
And to facilitate that adaptation, the text outlines this structural framework called the 7 C's of mental resilience. These are basically the load-bearing pillars. Let's run through them.
Sure. The foundation starts with competence and confidence, and they operate in a very tight feedback loop.
Because competence is just the objective skill, right? Like, you put in the hours, you know how to do the thing.
Right. And confidence is your subjective belief in that competence. But it's not blind optimism. Overconfidence is a huge liability because it ignores data. True confidence actually allows for doubt because you know you have the competence to figure it out.
Okay, so we have competence and confidence. The third C is connection, which is your support network. The fourth is character, having a clear moral compass. But the fifth one, contribution. This one blew my mind a little bit.
It's a really profound biological hack.
Yeah, because at first glance, contribution or helping others just sounds like a nice moral philosophy, but it's actually a physiological intervention.
It is. When you engage in acts of contribution, your brain releases a cascade of oxytocin and dopamine. Oxytocin actively suppresses the amygdala, which dampens your fear and anxiety response.
Wow. So helping someone else literally turns down your own panic alarms.
Yes, and it lowers cortisol. Plus, it dismantles your own psychological barriers to asking for help when you eventually need it. Then we have the final two C's, coping and control.
Coping being the tactical strategies to manage acute stress. But control, I feel like this is where most people, myself included, really trip up.
Because we misdefine control. In this context, control is the absolute recognition of your sphere of influence. It is not the ability to prevent bad things from happening.
You can't control the stock market or your boss's mood.
Exactly.
Yeah.
High resilience individuals completely sever their emotional attachment to variables they can't control. They redirect all that cognitive energy toward controlling their response.
Which is a perfect pivot because cognitive energy is exactly where this psychological software hits a biological wall. I mean, you could read all the Stoic philosophy you want, but if your physical hardware is failing, none of this matters.
Mind and body are a deeply integrated system. You cannot build the seven C's if your physiological engine is stalling out.
The numbers in the source material regarding the energy costs of the brain are just staggering.
They really are. The brain accounts for roughly 2% of an adult's body mass, but it demands 20% of your body's entire resting metabolic energy.
2% of the weight, 20% of the fuel. That is wild.
And in young children, it's actually up to 60%. The prefrontal cortex, which handles your executive function and willpower, is the most energy-hungry part of all.
So willpower isn't just a character trait. It's a finite biological resource.
Exactly. It runs on glucose and ATP.
And the most immediate way we sabotage that fuel source isn't even food, it's hydration. The text talks about this 2% hydration snap. What happens there?
Well, both the brain and the heart are roughly 73% water. If your body loses just 2% of its total water volume,
Which doesn't sound like much.
it's not. It's a very mild state of dehydration, usually happening long before you even feel thirsty. But the consequences are immediate. Your brain cells literally shrink slightly, which alters your electrolytes.
So the electrical signals in your brain physically slow down?
Yes, it heavily impairs focus, working memory, and emotional regulation.
So it's like trying to run this high-end, incredibly complex software on a laptop that has 1% battery, and the fan is screaming because it's overheating.
That is a perfect analogy. If we connect this to the bigger picture, when you're slightly dehydrated, your autonomic nervous system registers a state of low-level threat.
It's sending a silent alarm.
Exactly. It's subconsciously signaling the prefrontal cortex, saying, conserve energy, stop doing complex tasks. It silently erodes your confidence. You think you're burned out on a project, but really, your biology is just screaming for water.
So the expert advice here is a mandatory morning hydration routine. Waking up and immediately drinking 1 to 3 cups of water before you do anything else.
Before the coffee, before the inbox, you wake up medically dehydrated after sleeping. You have to restore that cellular volume first.
But speaking of sleeping, we have to talk about sleep architecture. Because high performers love to brag about the hustle and surviving on 5 hours of sleep.
Which is a biological disaster. The text is very clear. 7 to 9 hours are strictly required. And we have to debunk the myth of the sleep bank.
The idea that you can just sleep in on Saturday to make up for the week.
You cannot repay a sleep debt like that. Your circadian rhythm relies on absolute consistency. It expects sleep to happen at the same time every day.
And if you mess with that, you disrupt the brain's waste clearance system, right? The glymphatic system.
Yes. During deep sleep, your glial cells shrink, and cerebrospinal fluid physically washes through the neural tissue, clearing out metabolic waste. If you shortchange that, the waste builds up.
And the text points out that sleep deprivation causes a massive spike in errors.
A 36% increase in critical errors.
36%. I mean, imagine bringing a 36% failure rate to a boardroom presentation. And then on top of that, we are blasting our eyes with blue light from our phones right before bed.
Which mimics midday daylight. It hits your retina and completely halts the production of sleep hormones like melatonin. It keeps your nervous system in a state of arousal.
So the hardware needs water, it needs consistent sleep without screens, and it needs the right kind of fuel. The text goes into nutrition, specifically the glycemic index.
Yes, low GI versus high GI carbohydrates.
Because eating a bunch of processed sugar, the high GI stuff, that causes a huge spike and then a crash.
And your brain interprets that crash as an acute survival threat. It releases cortisol and adrenaline. You end up feeling panicked and irritable, and you think it's a psychological failure, but it's just your blood sugar bottoming out.
So the fix is low GI carbs, like sweet potatoes or whole grains, giving the brain a steady drip of energy. Okay, so let's say we've got the hardware sorted. We are hydrated, rested, and fueled. How do we program the actual software?
We do that by mastering habits. The brain uses habits to save its massive energy expenditure. It hands repetitive tasks over to the basal ganglia.
which creates the habit loop. Cue and then response. And the text notes it takes an average of 66 days to make a behavior automatic.
Roughly, yes. But the biggest mistake people make here is trying to utilize the habit of abstinence.
Okay, let's unpack this because I struggle with this. If I want to stop scrolling on my phone before bed, why is it so incredibly hard to just stop?
Because you cannot successfully form a habit of not doing something. The brain still experiences the cue, seeing the phone, feeling bored, and it demands a response.
So just white knuckling it with willpower doesn't work.
Willpower alone will cave under stress. The secret is to keep the cue, but attach a completely new response.
So I leave the phone in another room, and when I get into bed, the cue, I pick up a physical book instead.
Exactly. You hijack the neural pathway. And this relates directly to how we build skills, moving through the conscious competence hierarchy.
Which has 3 stages, right? First is conscious incompetence.
Right, where you are painfully aware of how bad you are at the new skill. It takes immense effort.
Then you move to conscious competence. You can do it, but you really have to focus.
But here is the trap. People reach conscious competence and they plateau. They repeat an exercise without increasing the
You
challenge.
just stay comfortable.
And if you do that, the skill never hardwires into unconscious competence, where it becomes an effortless reflex. You have to systematically increase the friction.
Wow, okay, so we have to constantly push the boundary.
Yeah.
But even if we are doing all of this, building good habits, pushing our skills, there are still these invisible psychological traps.
Yes, the pitfalls.
This is a great bonus segment from the notes, what most people get wrong. And the first one is this pursuit of total victory over fear,
The belief that we have to completely eradicate anxiety before we can succeed.
which is impossible, right? Because fear is an evolutionary instinct.
This raises an important question. What is the actual biological function of fear? It's tied to our oldest survival instincts, the fight-or-flight response in the amygdala.
So trying to eliminate it is like trying to permanently turn off your body's smoke detector.
Exactly. Total victory isn't the goal. The goal is acting in spite of fear. Highly successful people still feel fear. Their hearts still race. They just use that adrenaline as energetic fuel.
The second trap is toughening up via deliberate self-harm. Putting yourself in overwhelmingly high-stress situations before you're ready and never allowing for recovery.
Which is incredibly destructive.
It makes me think of going to the gym. If you work out until your muscles tear every single day and you never rest, you wouldn't get stronger. You'd just end up hospitalized and hating the gym.
Your body would break down. And the brain is the same. Chronic, unmitigated stress floods your system with cortisol and shrinks your cognitive capacity. Recovery is mandatory.
The third trap is social comparison.
Constantly comparing yourself to others, it usually results in one of two things. Envy, which completely saps your ability to focus on your own improvement.
Or haughtiness.
Right. Looking down on people, which makes you arrogant and brittle.
And the last pitfall is the all-or-nothing mindset. If something isn't absolutely perfect, it's a total failure.
Which is a cognitive distortion that guarantees you will quit at the first sign of friction.
But look, inevitably, even if we dodge these traps, we are going to fail. We will face setbacks, we will take damage. So how do we handle it?
We have to redefine what it means to be broken. And the source material uses a beautiful concept here, kintsugi.
The Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with liquid gold?
Yes. Instead of hiding the cracks and pretending the bowl was never broken, the artist highlights them with gold.
It makes the object visibly stronger at the fault lines and totally unique.
Psychologically, this is how we have to treat our traumas and failures. Integrating those experiences is the gold lacquer.
The text gives us some incredible case studies here, starting with Winston Churchill. I mean, we picture Churchill as this unshakable, cigar-smoking bulldog holding Britain together during World War II.
But his reality was defined by lifelong, crippling depression. He called it his black dog.
Yeah.
Plus, a history of childhood underperformance.
He had massive psychological fractures. So how did he lead a nation through a war?
By applying the kintsugi philosophy. He built resilience by diving into specific passions, like fencing and painting and history. But more importantly, his intimate battles with hopelessness gave him profound empathy.
Ah, because he knew exactly what despair felt like. He had the unique psychological gold to restore hope in an entire nation.
He weaponized his vulnerability.
And then there's the case study of Helen Keller, born into what was essentially a sensory void. blind and deaf.
She faced seemingly insurmountable physical barriers to the external world.
But she used her unquenchable desire for connection to overcome them.
Yes, her physical limitations forced her to develop an extraordinary inherent empathy. She transformed those physical flaws into a unique platform, becoming a globally beloved activist and author.
And functionally, we look at Thomas Edison, reframing his 1,000 failures to invent the light bulb simply as a 1,000-step process.
He refused to accept the premise of failure.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. Failure isn't a dead end at all. It's just raw data.
The psychological dents are hard-won diplomas from the School of Hard Knocks. A failure isn't a personal rejection of your worth. It's merely a teacher. It's offering you precise pointers on how to improve your technique for the next attempt.
So we take the data, apply the gold lacquer, and try again. But we don't live in a vacuum. We have to take this internal kintsugi pottery and interact with other people.
Which brings us to communication and connection, essentially your social armor.
Because toxic relationships will drain your cognitive battery faster than anything else. The text cites the rule of threes here.
Right. Humans can survive 3 minutes without air, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food.
But 3 months without love or human contact, and we psychologically deteriorate. Connection is literally vital for survival.
Which makes protecting the quality of those connections crucial. The primary tool for this is assertiveness.
The 3 S's. Keep communication short, simple, and specific.
We have this instinct to over-explain when we set a boundary out of guilt.
Yeah, we give a 5-minute monologue about why we can't take on a project.
Which just invites debate. A resilient communicator states the boundary plainly, and they use the I statement.
Saying, I feel overwhelmed with this workload, instead of the accusatory, you never give me a second thought before dumping work on me.
When you use a you statement, it triggers the other person's amygdala. They feel attacked and instantly get defensive. An I statement bypasses that and focuses on objective reality.
But what about handling criticism? We're supposed to assess if feedback is actionable.
Yes. Your report lacks data on Q3 is actionable. It hurts, but you can fix it.
But what do you do when someone is just throwing non-actionable, mean complaints at you, like your report is garbage?
If someone breaks down your work but cannot offer a solution when asked, it's a complaint, not a critique. The text quotes Mark Twain here, which I love. Never argue with an idiot. They will drag you to their level and beat you with experience.
That's brilliant.
You must recognize that unwarranted, vague criticism is often about the critic's need for power and dominance, not an objective truth about you. You have to emotionally disengage.
Okay, to tie all these conceptual threads together, let's move into a full FAQ section. We compiled the most pressing questions from the source notes for some rapid-fire, actionable takeaways. You ready?
Let's do it.
Question 1. How can I stop procrastinating on big, scary projects?
Break them into micro goals. If a task spikes your anxiety, it's too big. And tackle those micro goals during your peak thinking hours.
Which is usually when?
For most people waking up at 6 or 7 a.m., your peak executive function is mid-morning. Use that window. And set strict boundaries to avoid distractions.
Because of the focus cost, right?
Exactly. It takes roughly 20 minutes to regain deep focus after a single distraction, like a text message. Lock it down.
Question 2. How do I find my true passion?
Use exploratory questions to identify your element. This is an activity where you feel deeply challenged but not stressed, and you lose track of time.
The text mentions creating a historical timeline for this.
Yes. Write down one defining sentence for every year of your life. When you audit your own history, you will spot recurring themes of engagement. Your passion leaves a trail of data.
Question 3. Why shouldn't I apologize when asking for help? Like saying, I'm so sorry to bother you with this.
Because it belittles your needs. It makes the problem sound trivial. And crucially, it robs the person helping you of the satisfaction of contributing.
It takes away that dopaminergic reward we talked about earlier.
Exactly. State your needs plainly. Explain why their specific skills make them the ideal person to help. Make it a collaboration, not a burden.
Final question. How do I start if I currently feel like a total, quote-unquote, mental wimp?
You start with the baseline. Do not try to overhaul your life in a day. Hydrate first thing in the morning. Take 15 minutes and clean your immediate workspace to gain a sense of control.
Small wins.
Small compounding wins. And practice self-compassion. Growth is not about showing off how tough you are. It is about pacing yourself to avoid overstretching and breaking.
That is incredibly practical. And it leads us to our final thought for today. We've gone through the biology, the habits, the social armor. But the most profound realization drawn from this text is about agency.
It absolutely is.
Your circumstances, where you were born, the economy, your early traumas, they may limit your menu of options, but they can never limit your ability to choose.
That is the core of mental fortitude.
What you choose to input into the world matters far more than the world you were born into. You are the author of your own chronological story.
The raw data of your life doesn't dictate your algorithm. You control the response.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We know your time is valuable, and we appreciate you spending it with us.
It's been a great conversation.
If you want to keep building that unbeatable mind, be sure to subscribe to the show. And definitely check out the affiliate link in the show notes to grab a copy of Addison Bell's mental training for yourself.
Highly recommend it.
Keep applying that gold lacquer